Whipping up all of your favorite recipes.
Simply Food.
You should know by now that you're in for a treat.
Simply Food.
There's no other channel where you'd rather be.
Simply Food.
Seafood, pasta, cakes, and pies. Sing and laugh and even cry. Like and share and hit subscribe. Simply Food by TY.
What's up, you guys? It's your boy Simply Food by TY, and today I'm going to share with you guys this perfect pie crust recipe that I have been using for years. So let's jump right on into it. So to a food processor, you're going to add in 2.5 cups of all-purpose flour, and of course, to any type of pastry, you're going to want to add a little bit of salt. So we're going to add in 1/4 of a teaspoon of sea salt, and then we're also going to be adding in 1/4 of a cup of granulated sugar. Of course, this is meant to be for a sweet pie, apple pie, cherry pie, whatever kind of pie. So you definitely want to have a tinge of sweetness to that pie crust. Now, of course, if you want to use this pie crust but make it for more savory, you could omit the sugar or just reduce it by half. Now, we're going to give that a little pulse just to get everything kind of incorporated about 3 or 4 times, just to get it nice and smooth. And then what we're going to do is we're going to add in some extremely cold butter, okay? We're gonna add in 1 cup, so that's 2 sticks of unsalted butter. Now, I cut it up in little cubes just because it'll make it easier, for when we go to pulverize this in a few seconds. But by doing it this way, this is going to break up into little tiny flakes all within the flour itself. And that is going to create the buttery, flaky, crispy texture that we all love when it comes to pies. Now, I'm going to make sure that I leave the original link to this recipe down in the description box below. This is a recipe that I have been using courtesy of the Preppy Kitchen, of course. Anything when it comes to baking, I always go to him, and I wanted to make sure that I shared this recipe with you guys and how I make it. So what I'm looking for right now is just making sure, that none of the butter is stuck to the side of the container, and also just making sure that we're getting it down to the right size. You want the little pieces of butter to be about the size of like lentils. You don't want it too fine, but you definitely don't want giant chunks of butter. You definitely want to make sure that it's mixed throughout. Now, what we're going to do now is just to add a little bit of moisture to it. Now that we got it to the right texture, we're going to start to add in 2 tablespoons of vodka. Don't worry, that's going to cook off. That's just going to give it that extra bit of crispiness. And what I have here is a little bowl that has 5 tablespoons of ice water. So right now I'm just draining that water out of the ice. The key is for the butter and both of the liquids to be extremely cold. So I put the vodka in the freezer and put the water inside of the refrigerator as well, with some ice cubes as well, just to make sure that everything stays, nice and solid the way it's supposed to be. Now, what we're going to do now is kind of just give this a gentle molding. Now, as you can see, it seems kind of, flaky and kind of just like, crumbling apart. What I like to do is I will use my pastry mat here to kind of just begin the process of gelling it together. And you will notice the more and the more you do this, the more the dough will kind of work itself together. It kind of just needs a little bit of love and care to it. You don't really have to knead it or do a lot, because once we put this dough in the refrigerator, it's going to come together beautifully and you'll be able to handle it a whole lot easier. So don't stress if it seems like it's too watery. Now, especially if you stuck to the measurements, if for some reason it seems as if yours is still not coming together, by all means feel free to add just a little teeny bit of water, maybe about a teaspoon at a time, just until it's almost together. You don't want it to be wet, okay? Now I'm going to put this on some cling wrap and I'm going to mold this down. If you guys, have the patience and really care, you can definitely form this into the perfect circle to begin with, but I don't think it's necessary. You can roll it out to whatever you want it to be. But the key here is that you want to make sure that you put this dough in the refrigerator for at least an hour, okay? You want it to be nice and cold. That's going to get that dough to really form together just the way you want it to be. So now that that's been in the fridge for an hour, what you want to go ahead and do is have your oven preheated to 425 degrees, because this process now is not really going to take that long. So once you take it out of the fridge, I would suggest let it sit on the counter for, I would say, a minute or so. It just really depends on the temperature where you are. You don't want it to come down to complete room temperature, but you definitely want it to warm up just a tinch because it'll make it easier for you to roll out. If it's too cold when you start to roll out, it'll just immediately start to crack everywhere, and then you'll spend a lot of time just unnecessarily trying to fix the cracks, to where if you let it just get a little bit closer to room temperature when you first pull it out of the fridge, it'll make it a lot easier for you. Now, this is the thing. When it comes to pie crust, you guys, look, if you are a baker, which I am not, which I know some of you guys are probably like, TY, whatever, but I'm telling you, I'm not a baker. But the one thing that I do love about baking is that they don't need to be perfect, and that's one of the best things about pies in general. You can make a pie, and baby, if that thing is ugly, call it rustic and everybody will live for it. You know what I mean? So like, if you aren't the perfect person that knows how to roll out dough without it being uneven, or if you can't get it to not do the perfect lattice, if you're doing an apple pie or something like that, don't let that discourage you from continuing to attempt to bake. That's the reason why I started this series. Absolutely not, because I wanted to test out other recipes from people that I admire and see if I can also do the same thing as a person that doesn't identify as a baker. So, just keep those things in mind when you guys are looking at other YouTubers or other chefs and you see a dish that you've been dying to try but you're afraid to attempt it. I say attempt it, try it, and just see what happens. At the end of the day, you've created a new memory. So what you guys can see me doing now is I'm pretty much just trying to get this rolled out so that it's about, I would say, an inch or two bigger than what the actual baking dish is that I'm going to be using. Now, what I will say is that depending upon how thick you like your crust, you can really thin this out, or you can keep it a tiny bit thicker, kind of like how I did. I like mine a little bit on the thicker side, so that's just kind of, how I prefer mine. So now that we got this the way we want it to be, I'm going to go ahead and flour up my rolling pin. Once again, I'm going to use the silicone mat to help me get a kickstart on rolling the dough over onto the rolling pin, so that way I can easily transfer it to my pie dish. Now, I'm going to be using a 9-inch deep dish baking dish. Now, my baking dish is very deep. I think it's maybe 3 inches. I'm not sure. But as you can see, it's a pretty deep pan. So, if you have a deep pan like mine, then this recipe will absolutely work for you. And like I said, you don't have to use a deep dish pan, but just know that this will make enough dough to work in a deep dish. So pretty much what I'm saying is that this pie crust you could pretty much use for any size pan, to be honest with you, because if it can work for this big pan, it can work for any of them. Now, as you can see, what I'm doing is I'm lifting up the side so that I can drop the dough down into the pan. One thing you never want to do is you don't want to stretch the dough. If you decide to try to pull and stretch the dough to fit into the bottom of the pan, all it's simply going to do is shrink. It's not going to stay in the shape where you had it. So you really want to lift up the side of the dough and let the weight of the dough fall down into the bottom of the pan, and then press along the sides so that way you can ensure that the dough is not going to shrink. Now, once you get that done, you can go on ahead and cut off some of the excess. Now, once again, this is the part of the recipe where I tell people this is completely up to your artistic vision, to be honest, because once again, I'm not a baker, but I know how to make a good pie crust and I know how to make it look presentable. But if you want the perfect pie crust, they have pre-rollers that people can use, or if you have some fancy crimping design that you want to do on the edge of yours, you could absolutely do that and make it the perfect pie. But for me, I'm going to do a very basic one. Now, what I will say is you want to make sure that you're cutting off, I would say, an equal amount of the excess on the sides, just so that you can make sure that your dough is cook evenly. You want to make sure that the crust is cooking evenly. So as you guys can see, I'm doing the most basic little crimping, whatever you want to call it here on the side. I'm literally just taking my 2 fingers and then pressing 1 finger in just to create a little crimping action. If you don't want to do that, honestly, you can take a fork, push it, press it down into the dough and do that around the whole way. That's totally fine. If you don't want to do any of that, honestly, you can just let it hang over the side. Do whatever you got to do, but don't let it not possibly turning out perfect stop you from baking. That's really the message that I'm trying to make sure that everybody remembers here, because that is extremely important. It's what kept me from wanting to bake for so long, and I'm kind of starting to get over that, which is really, really fun. So once you get this all done, I don't know if I've already said this, I'm going to re-mention it again. Make sure you guys have your oven preheated at 425 degrees, okay? Now, the next thing you're going to want to do is get yourself some parchment paper as well as aluminum foil. You're going to cut that out to be about the shape of the bottom of your pie crust, because what we want to do now is we want to get it nice and weighted. That way, the bottom of the pie shell, when we do bake it, it does not rise up and it doesn't lose its shape. So I'm going to start off with some parchment paper. Then I'm going to also go in with some aluminum foil. And then you can either take rice or beans or baking weights, and you want to make sure that you fill up the inside of your pie crust so that you have something nice and heavy weighing it down. The reason why you're doing that is so that, once again, the pie itself does not lose shape once the butter in it starts to melt. You want to make sure that it stays in place, for those first couple of minutes while it's baking. So I'm adding in some baking weights. Like I said, if you don't have those, you don't have to go out of your way and buy them. You can use rice, you can use beans. That's totally fine. Now, before we bake this, we do want to place this in the fridge, you guys, for about 30 minutes so that it can get nice and cold again. Now that it's nice and chilled, we're going to place this in the oven at 425 degrees, like I said. And we're going to put that in there for, I would say, 15 minutes, okay? So the first baking time is going to be for 15 minutes. While that's doing that, go on ahead and get yourself a tablespoon of heavy cream. You can use milk, that's totally fine. And get yourself 1 egg, and you're going to give that a good whisk, because what we're going to do is, after that 15 minutes is up, we're going to go ahead and give this pie crust a nice little bath of this egg wash so that it can get that golden brown color, okay? So after the 15 minutes is up, you want to make sure that you carefully, and I mean very carefully, because those beads are going to be very, very hot. So you can set those to the side because we're completely done with those. And then you're also going to remove that parchment paper as well. Then you're going to take your egg wash that you had in the fridge, and you're just going to pretty much wash this entire pie crust down with that. Now, by doing this, first of all, it's going to make sure that your pie crust is beautifully brown, but also it's also going to kind of create a little bit of a seal, so that way when you put your filling in, especially if it's a pie that's a little bit on the looser side, it won't make your pie crust soggy. So that's a good way to keep it nice and safe. You're going to poke a few holes in it. Make sure you don't puncture all the way through, but just enough so that we can create some little air pockets. That way your pie crust will not rise up in the oven. You're going to cover the crust with some aluminum foil, because that's going to keep it from getting burnt and brown on the edges. Pop that in the oven at 425 for 15 minutes, then reduce it to 375 for an additional 10 to 20 minutes, or until it's to the color of your liking. And just like that, you guys have made a beautifully delicious, buttery, flaky pie crust. Look, I want to thank you guys so much for tuning in today. If you're one of my returning subscribers, y'all babies know I love y'all so much. And if you are new to my channel, well, I hope you've enjoyed what you've seen thus far. Hit that bell to be notified. Go on ahead and give this video a thumbs up. And if you want to come back, subscribe. I'll see y'all later. Take care. Bye-bye.
Slaying in the kitchen.
Simply Food by TY.
We hope that you enjoyed it.
Simply Food by TY. If you haven't took the time, make sure you subscribe. Thanks for watching. Thanks for watching. Thanks for watching Simply Food by